I'm Charlotte Brennan, 33 years old, and just a few months ago, I would have sworn my sister and I were unbreakable. We grew up sharing bunk beds and inside jokes, braided hair on school mornings, and whispered our secrets in the dark. If you'd told me that one day I'd drag my bloodied body to my parents' porch after her husband shattered my shoulder and broke my face, I wouldn't have believed it. Not because Travis Hale didn't scare me, he always did, but because I thought Lacey would never stand by and watch. But she did. And what she said that night still cuts deeper than any bruise you should have just signed the mortgage. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to learn the hard way that love alone doesn't guarantee loyalty. I was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, in a split-level house with weathered shutters and a backyard where Dad taught us to build snow forts every winter. My parents, Richard and Jean, worked hard to give us a steady life. He was a mail carrier. She ran a local florist shop, and they believed in old-school values. Dad used to say family is your roots, your roof and your refuge, usually over his famous meatloaf. I took that seriously. I still do. I was the big sister who stood between Lacey and playground bullies who helped with math homework and wiped away tears when she didn't make the dance team. When I left for college to study nursing, Lacey cried the whole ride home. I wrote her every week. She tried college, too, but dropped out after a year and a half, said it didn't feel right. I didn't push. Not everyone's path looks the same. While I juggled night shifts and coffee-fueled study marathons, she drifted between jobs, coffee shops, boutiques, seasonal gigs. Still, every Thursday, we had our standing dinner, spaghetti trash TV, and laughter that made the day melt off my bones. If she needed help, car trouble, rent short, a breakup, I showed up. Not because I had to, because she was mine to protect. That's what I told myself. That's what I believed. When she met Travis Hale at a wedding, she fell hard and fast. He was tall, self-assured, said all the right things. Our parents liked him. He called Dad Sir and brought Mom orchids on their second meeting. But I saw it early. The way his hand lingered too long on her elbow, how he corrected her mid-sentence with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. I noticed Lacey's voice go smaller when he was in the room. I didn't say anything back then. She looked so happy, and I didn't want to be the storm cloud. They got married a year later, throwing a huge wedding they couldn't afford. Lacey wore a gown that cost more than my car. They toasted to new beginnings under rented chandeliers, and I gave a speech about sisterhood and love, choking back what I didn't say. After the reception, Travis pulled me aside. He smelled like bourbon and sweat. "Must be nice," he said, fingers clamped tight around my wrist, being everyone's golden girl. Then he laughed and walked away. I rubbed my wrist for days afterward. Over the next few years, the requests started. $200 here, $1,000 there. Lacey always promised it was temporary, that Travis had a deal coming through a bonus around the corner. I stopped asking questions. I didn't want to embarrass her. Our parents started noticing things too: missed holidays, vague explanations, photos online that didn't match the stories. But whenever she called, I picked up. When she cried about being behind on bills, I wired the money. I believed helping her meant keeping her safe. But safety isn't something you can give to someone who's already decided to hand it away. The last time we were truly sisters was a Sunday. I had just come off a double shift and was looking forward to lasagna leftovers and a blanket. Then my doorbell rang. They were both dressed like magazine ads, she in a floral dress I'd seen in a downtown boutique, he in a crisp shirt with cologne thick in the air. They brought takeout, called it a surprise visit. Lacey smiled too hard, and Travis made himself at home. Halfway through dessert, she reached for my hand and said they'd found their dream house in Lakewood Heights. "We just need a signature," she said. "You won't owe anything. It's just a formality." When I asked the price, $850,000, Travis didn't blink. I set down my fork. Something inside me shifted. I saw the gap between the life I'd built and the illusion they lived in, and for the first time, I didn't want to step into theirs. I said I'd think about it. That night, I stayed up reading about mortgage guarantors. By morning, I knew what I had to say, but I didn't know yet what it would cost me, not just in bruises, but in blood and in the sister I thought would always have my back. Travis started texting the next morning. Just a simple check-in at first, asking if I'd had a chance to review the paperwork. Then Lacey followed with a smiley face emoji and, "We're so excited. Can't wait to move in." I hadn't even responded yet. By Wednesday, the messages were coming twice a day, sometimes 3. The sellers need a decision. We might lose the rate. This is our shot. I kept rereading the same line from the loan articles I'd bookmarked: a guarantor is fully liable if the borrower defaults. The risk wasn't something I could ignore. By Thursday night, Lacey's texts had turned from cheerful to disappointed. "I thought I could count on you. You've always been the responsible one. Guess that only goes one way." That weekend was our monthly family dinner. Mom had already started peeling potatoes when I arrived. I offered to help with the roast, same as always. Dad was in the living room watching football, calling out for me to grab a soda from the fridge. It felt normal. I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for Lacey and Travis to walk through the door. When they finally did, nearly 40 minutes late, Travis immediately launched into stories about a big deal he was closing and how everyone was about to see his name on billboards. Lacey stayed close to his side, nodding at everything he said like it was gospel. During dessert, she followed me into the kitchen. Her tone was tight, rehearsed. "We need an answer by Monday," she said, eyes scanning mine for any crack. I steadied myself and gave her the truth. "I can't do it, Lacey." I looked into what it actually means. If something goes wrong, I could lose my home, my savings, everything. She didn't blink at first, just stared. Then she snapped, "So your credit score matters more than your sister?" I tried to keep my voice calm. "It's not about a score. It's about protecting what I've worked for. This is too much to ask." Her jaw tightened, and without another word, she turned and left the room. I watched her whisper something sharp into Travis's ear before they left without saying goodbye to anyone. The next morning, I called Travis directly. I didn't want any confusion. I told him clearly I'm not comfortable being a guarantor. "I hope you understand this is a financial decision." There was a pause. Then he said low and cold, "You know Charlotte family supports each other. This feels like betrayal." I repeated myself. "It's not personal." He didn't like that. Lacey was right. You think you're better than everyone with your steady job and your safe little condo. You don't get what it means to dream big. Then he hung up. After that, it got worse. Texts at all hours. One came in at 3:04 a.m. "Hope you sleep well, knowing you destroyed your sister's dreams." Another a day later. "People remember who turned their back when it mattered." Lacey's tone was different, quieter, but more manipulative. "Remember when I stayed at the hospital with you after your appendix surgery? I never left your side." I tried to respond once, calmly linking to an article about the risks of co-signing. Travis shot back within an hour. "We don't need your financial literacy lectures. We need your signature. Period." It began to affect my work. I found myself rechecking medication dosages I normally wouldn't second-guess. My hands shook during a blood draw. During one late shift, I nearly mixed up 2 patients' charts. Sandra, my supervisor, pulled me aside. We sat in the break room, and she just asked, "What's going on?" I broke down, told her everything. She listened quietly, then said, "You made the right call, but you need to keep records. These messages are crossing a line." The following Sunday, we had another family dinner. I almost didn't go, but I didn't want my parents to worry. When Lacey and Travis arrived, they walked in without knocking right in the middle of Dad's blessing. Travis made comments all through the meal, veiled barbs aimed at me. "Some families know the meaning of sacrifice," he said, while passing the green beans. "Others just play it safe and call it wisdom." Mom tried to change the subject, but Travis circled back every time. At one point, Dad said maybe they should look at something smaller, more affordable. Travis gave him a cold smile. Some folks are content with ordinary. Others reach higher. Then he looked straight at me. And some pretend to care while stabbing their own in the back. After dinner, I went to Megan's apartment. She was an attorney I'd known since nursing school. She'd never liked Travis. I showed her the texts, the voicemails. She scrolled through, then looked at me and said, "This is harassment. You need to set boundaries and maybe block them for now." I hesitated. "They're still family." She looked up from my phone. "Family doesn't do this." 3 days later, I was on shift at St. Mary's when a nurse tapped me on the shoulder. "There's a man at the front desk asking for you. Says he's your brother-in-law." My stomach dropped. I walked to the front desk, and there he was. Travis in a tailored suit, arms crossed, looking completely out of place under the fluorescent lights. I pulled him aside. "This is my workplace. You can't be here." He didn't lower his voice. "You've been ignoring us. We need an answer. We're about to lose the deal." I kept mine steady. "You already have your answer." "It's no. Please leave or I'll call security." His face twisted. "You really think you're so perfect, don't you?" I turned and signaled the desk. Security walked him out. That night I saw his car in the hospital parking lot, lights off, engine running, just sitting there. He didn't get out. He didn't need to. I drove home a different route, checked the mirrors the whole way. I started saving screenshots of texts, noting down times, keeping everything. Megan was right. If things escalated, I'd need it all. 3 days later, my phone rang at 9:15 p.m. I was prepping for an early shift. Lacey's name appeared. Her voice was strained. "Travis is upset. We lost the house. He's coming to talk to you." I sat upright. "Lacey, what do you mean coming to talk? He shouldn't be anywhere near me right now." She didn't answer, just said, "Please listen to him. It's important to us." Then she hung up. Not even 15 minutes later, someone pounded on my door, not a knock, a pounding that made the hinges shudder. I looked through the peephole. Travis. His face was red, eyes wild. "Open the door, Charlotte. I know you're in there." I had 911 pulled up on my phone, but hadn't pressed call. I thought maybe I could talk him down. One last time. "You need to calm down, Travis," I said through the door. "We can talk, but not like this." I cracked it open just an inch, thinking the chain would hold. It didn't. The chain snapped before I could brace myself. The door burst open with a jolt that knocked me backwards, slamming my hip hard into the hallway wall. My phone slipped from my hand and skidded across the hardwood. Travis didn't pause. He stepped inside with such force I could feel the vibrations in the floor. His hands were already on me before I could regain my balance. He grabbed my upper arm and shoved me deeper into the apartment. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, squeezing so hard it made my knees weaken. "You think you're better than us?" He spat his face inches from mine. Little Miss Nurse with her savings and her rules. I told him to stop, tried to reason with him, but my voice came out thin and useless. He dragged me backward toward the living room, his fingers digging into my shoulder. "You ruined everything," he growled, shaking me once hard enough that my head snapped to the side. I stumbled, nearly fell, but caught myself on the edge of the couch. I said again, "Travis, stop." My voice cracked this time. That only made him angrier. He lifted me by the arms and threw me backward into the wall. My head struck the drywall with a sound I can still hear when everything else is quiet. Before I could even register the pain, his hand grabbed the back of my head and slammed it forward. I felt the break before I heard it. My nose shattered against the plaster. Blood poured down my face, fast and hot, blurring my vision. I screamed. It wasn't a word, just sound. He twisted my arm behind my back and pulled until I felt something tear, then pop. My shoulder dislocated in one clean, sickening motion. I collapsed. My body gave out beneath me. I was on the floor, face down, trying to breathe, trying to understand how quickly it had all happened. Then I saw her. Lacey stood in the doorway. Her arms were crossed, her face calm. I called out to her. "Help me!" I gasped. She didn't move. She didn't speak at first. Then she said, clear as day, "You should have signed the mortgage." She didn't flinch. She didn't come closer, just stood there while I bled on my own carpet. Travis let go of my arm, and I crumpled, completely unable to stop myself from falling sideways. He turned away from me and started pacing, then grabbed one of the framed photos off the wall and hurled it across the room. It hit the kitchen cabinets and shattered. He kept going, books off the shelf. My lamp knocked over picture frames, smashed against furniture. I tried to crawl toward the door. Every movement sent fire through my ribs. He noticed. His foot connected with my side, and I couldn't breathe. I saw white, then black, then white again. Lacey finally spoke. "We should go. The neighbors probably heard." Travis stood above me, panting, his face red and wild. Then he spat on the floor beside me. "Next time you'll think twice before turning your back on family," he said. And just like that, they were gone. The door stayed open behind them, letting in the night air. I stayed there on the floor, not sure how much time passed. The pain was everywhere. My nose was still bleeding. My shoulder hung limp. My ribs ached with each breath. My clothes were soaked through with blood. But I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get out. My parents lived 2 blocks away. If I could get there, I'd be safe. I pulled myself upright using the base of the couch. It took everything I had just to get my feet under me. My right arm was useless, and every step made my vision blur. I left streaks of red along the hallway wall as I reached the elevator. Downstairs, I pushed through the lobby doors into the cold night. The air hit me like a slap, and I gasped. I walked hunched, each step smaller than the last, just trying to keep forward motion. I thought about Travis's car. I kept looking behind me, but the street was quiet. The only sound was the wind in the trees and my breathing. Halfway down my parents' block, my knees buckled. I dropped to the sidewalk. My legs weren't working. I crawled the last few feet, dragging my bad arm blood, dripping steadily from my face. I made it to the porch steps. My parents' porch light was on, thank God. I reached up with my good hand and rang the doorbell. Then everything faded. The next thing I remember was voices, bright lights above me. The sound of wheels on tile. My father's hand holding mine, shaking. "You're safe now, honey," he kept saying. "You're safe." I couldn't respond, but I heard him. The hospital was familiar but strange from this side. I'd walked those halls 100 times in my scrubs, comforting others. Now I was the one being wheeled in, strapped to a stretcher. They sedated me to reset my shoulder. I heard words floating over me: orbital fracture, nasal fracture, contusions, cracked ribs. When I woke again, Detective Karen Ellis was sitting by my bed. I knew her by reputation firm, but fair, never backed down from a case. She was taking notes but not pushing me. "Take your time," she said. Her tone was even, but I saw her eyes tighten when I described what happened, especially when I said Lacey had been there. She watched the detective asked. She stood there and said nothing. I nodded. My voice was too raw to speak. She explained the process ahead: charges, protective orders, documentation. I listened, trying to stay focused. My parents came in once the interview ended. Mom looked like she hadn't stopped crying since she found me. Dad stood behind her, fists clenched, jaw tight. "They're looking for him," he said. "We told them everything we knew. Lacey isn't answering." Minutes later, she showed up. Lacey walked into the hospital room in clean clothes, hair brushed, not a scratch on her. "I need to talk to my sister alone," she said, like it was her right. Detective Ellis looked to me. I nodded. I wanted to hear what she had to say. Once we were alone, she stepped closer. "Travis has been arrested," she said flatly. It got out of hand. I stared at her. Out of hand, I whispered, "He tried to kill me, Lacey." She looked away. "You're being dramatic." "He lost his temper, but he didn't mean to." I cut her off. "Stop." She shifted her purse strap. "If you drop the charges, we can deal with this privately. It doesn't have to ruin everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, and asked, "Why are you protecting him?" Her response came low and shaky. "That house was our future. You don't understand. You took it from us." I couldn't believe it. "So I deserved this?" I asked. She didn't answer. Detective Ellis stepped back in her presence enough to make Lacey retreat. My parents came in after. They didn't say much, just sat with me. My mom kept reaching for my hand gently, as if to remind herself I was still there. The next day, a social worker named Angela stopped by. She brought a folder of resources, support groups, legal aid, therapy, referrals. "You're not alone in this," she said. One pamphlet had a small bird rising from ashes on the cover. It was called Survivors Rising. I didn't know it yet, but that symbol would come to mean more to me than I could have imagined. Angela left the folder on the rolling table beside my bed, her hand resting lightly on the cover for a moment before she wished me rest. I waited until the room was quiet before pulling it closer. The pages listed numbers, addresses, names of people I'd never met, but who apparently spent their lives helping women like me. One small brochure caught my eye, a white bird rising from dark ash with the words "Survivors Rising" in simple print. I slipped it under my pillow. 2 days later, I was discharged with my right arm in a sling and instructions to avoid lifting anything heavier than a coffee mug. Dad met us at the curb in his truck, loading my bag in the back. Mom fussed over the seat belt, making sure it didn't press against my ribs. The ride to my apartment was silent except for the turn signal and the hum of the engine. Inside, Dad walked the rooms like a man inspecting storm damage. The overturned lamp, the dent in the wall, he didn't speak, just took it in. Mom opened windows, letting in the late winter air. That evening, Detective Ellis called. "We've served a temporary protection order," she said. "It prohibits any contact from Travis, direct or indirect. Violation means immediate arrest." I thanked her, though the words felt small. She also mentioned the district attorney wanted to move quickly on charges, given the medical evidence and witness statements. The first court date came faster than I expected. My face was still swollen, though the worst of the bruising had shifted to a deep yellow. I sat beside the prosecutor, a woman named Dana Weiss, whose calm, even voice made me feel steadier. Across the aisle, Travis wore a dark suit. His hair was neatly combed, his expression composed, as if the past 2 weeks hadn't happened. Lacey sat behind him, hands clasped in her lap. The defense attorney spoke first, framing it as a family dispute that got out of hand. I felt my grip tighten on the edge of the table. Dana leaned toward me. "Just breathe," she whispered. When the judge asked about the protective order, Dana handed over the photos of my injuries. The room went still. The judge kept the order in place and set a trial date. Afterward in the hallway, I saw Lacey hurry to catch up with Travis. She didn't glance my way. Mom put a hand on my back, steering me toward the exit. "Give her time," she said quietly. "She's still under him." The following week, I made an appointment at the address printed on that Survivors Rising brochure. The building was plain brick with a security buzzer by the door. Inside, the meeting room was set up in a circle. 8 chairs, a box of tissues on the low table in the center. The facilitator, Brenda Keyes, introduced herself. Her left sleeve was pinned neatly, where her arm ended just below the elbow. She welcomed me without asking for details. I listened through the first half, hearing fragments of stories that sounded too familiar, shouting, that turned to hitting threats disguised as jokes, families who refused to see the truth. When it was my turn, I told them about the night Travis came to my door, about the slam into the wall, about Lacey's words. The room stayed quiet until I finished. Brenda nodded. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't what was done to you," she said. "It's who let it happen." After the meeting, a woman with bright red hair approached me. "I'm Trina Marsh," she said. "I'm an attorney and I work with survivors pro bono when I can." We sat in her small office. 2 days later, the desk piled with folders. She explained the difference between the criminal case and what we could build on our own documentation, witness statements, even past reports from other women. "It shows a pattern," she said, flipping through my phone screenshots. "It tells the court this wasn't a one-time loss of control." In the weeks that followed, my days fell into a slow rhythm. Physical therapy, 3 mornings a week, ice packs in the afternoon, short walks when the weather allowed. At night, sleep came in fits broken by flashes of the hallway, the door swinging open, the sound of my own voice yelling for help. Lacey tried to call twice. I let them go to voicemail. I forwarded both to Trina. Mom stopped by every few days bringing soup or laundry detergent. Dad installed a small camera above my front door. One afternoon, he stayed longer than usual, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee. "I should have seen it sooner," he said. The way he spoke over her, how she stopped making her own choices. I didn't answer, but I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. 2 months after the attack, Trina called with an update. "We found 2 women who filed police reports against Travis in other counties," she said. "No convictions, but both described similar intimidation. She wanted to add it to our file. It strengthens the argument that he's a danger." As spring came in, so did the trial date. Each time I drove past the courthouse, I felt my stomach tighten. I knew I'd have to sit there, speak out loud, and answer questions while he watched. But I also knew this time I wouldn't be alone. 2 days before the trial, my doorbell rang. The camera feed showed Lacey standing alone in the hall, her hands wrapped around herself. I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me. We stood a few feet apart. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. "Travis made a mistake. One terrible mistake. Does he deserve to have his life ruined over it?" I kept my tone even. He broke my face, dislocated my shoulder, cracked my ribs. "Yes, he does." She swallowed hard. "He's my husband. What am I supposed to do if he goes to prison?" I told her she could start by telling the truth about that night. She flinched. "I can't testify against him." I reminded her there was no spousal privilege for what she'd witnessed. The softness in her face closed up. "I won't help you destroy my marriage," she said before turning away. The morning of the trial, the courthouse halls echoed with the shuffle of shoes and low voices. Dana met me by the elevator, her stack of files tucked under one arm. "We'll start with the medical testimony," she said, guiding me toward the courtroom. Inside, Travis sat beside his attorney, his expression neutral. Lacey was behind him, staring down at her hands. The proceedings began with the ER physician describing my injuries in detail: orbital fracture, nasal fracture, dislocated shoulder, 3 cracked ribs. The photos were entered into evidence. I kept my eyes on the table while they were displayed, focusing on breathing slowly. When my name was called, Dana stood beside me as I took the stand. The prosecutor's questions were measured, walking me through the events of that night step by step. I told them about the pounding on the door, the chains snapping, the blows the moment I saw Lacey in the doorway. "What did she say?" the prosecutor asked. "She said, 'You should have signed the mortgage.'" My voice caught slightly, but I kept going. The defense attorney tried to shift the narrative. "Isn't it true you've always been the more responsible sister? The one who kept control?" I met his eyes. "I've worked for what I have. That doesn't make me responsible for paying for someone else's home." He pressed again about family loyalty, about whether I'd provoked Travis by refusing. Dana objected twice, and the judge sustained both. Then they called Lacey. She took the oath, her gaze fixed on the floor. The defense led her through questions that sounded rehearsed, how tensions had been high, how emotions ran over. But when they asked her to describe what she'd seen, she finally looked at me. He was out of control. She said, her voice low but clear. He smashed her face into the wall. Her shoulder. She stopped to swallow. I've never heard my sister scream like that, and I did nothing. I just stood there. The room was silent. The defense attorney tried to redirect, but her admission hung in the air. By late afternoon, the jury had the case. They were out less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Travis to 5 years in prison, followed by 3 years probation, and issued a permanent restraining order. As he was led away, the mask he'd worn in court slipped, and the glare he sent my way made the hairs rise on my arms. In the hallway, Lacey approached slowly. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I've filed for divorce. I'm getting help." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. I just nodded. She started to say something else, then stopped. "You deserve better," she said finally before walking toward the exit. That night, I sat in my living room sling, still strapped to my arm, listening to the quiet. The trial was over, but the work of putting myself back together had only begun. The weeks after the trial moved slower than I expected. I thought I'd feel lighter once the verdict came down, but the aches in my body were still there, and the bruises on my face faded long before the heaviness in my chest did. Physical therapy became my routine 3 mornings a week in a small clinic where the smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint scent of eucalyptus from the therapist's lotion. Each session left my shoulders sore, but a little more mobile. I learned to move carefully, avoiding the positions that made the joint threaten to slip out again. Nights were harder. Sleep came in broken stretches. Sometimes I'd wake up certain I'd heard pounding on the door, my heart racing until I realized the apartment was silent. Other times the memory replayed in full before I could stop it, the door giving way, the impact against the wall, Lacey standing there. I'd get up, walk to the kitchen, and sit with a mug of tea until the tightness in my chest eased. 3 months after the trial, I made the decision to move. Dad helped me find a secure building across town. It had controlled access cameras in the hallways and a manager who lived on site. Packing was its own challenge. Some items I set aside without thinking: clothes, dishes, books. Others I hesitated over. The coffee table Travis had kicked over stayed behind. So did the vase my mother had given me, shattered during that night. I didn't want reminders in my new space. My relationship with my parents shifted in small ways during that time. They stopped trying to speak for Lacey when her name came up, though. Mom still mentioned when she called. Once, while Dad was tightening the lock on my new door, he said quietly, "She told us he started pushing her to cut contact with you months before the mortgage thing. Said you were a bad influence." He shook his head. "Guess I know why now." I didn't respond. Some things didn't need an answer. The first time I saw Lacey after the trial was at our parents' house. They'd invited me for Sunday dinner, and when I walked in, she was already at the table. Her hair was shorter, and she looked thinner, but she greeted me with a small nod. The conversation stayed on safe topics: recipes, whether a new show on television. We avoided anything that might pull us back into the courtroom. Later, while Mom and Dad were in the kitchen, she spoke quietly. "I keep thinking about that night, why I didn't move, why I just stood there." She twisted her hands together. "My therapist calls it trauma bonding. Says years of control can make you freeze, but it still feels like I chose wrong. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened." It was the first time she'd acknowledged it without defending him. As the months went on, I found myself spending more time at Survivors Rising. At first, I just attended meetings, but eventually I started helping set up chairs or making coffee before sessions. Brenda asked if I'd be willing to speak at a small community event, and I agreed. Standing at the front of a library meeting room, I told a room of strangers what had happened, not all the details, just enough to explain why boundaries mattered. I noticed people nodding as I spoke, some with their hands folded tight in their laps, others wiping at their eyes. By the 1-year mark, the nightmares had eased, though certain sounds like a sudden knock could still make my breath catch. Dr. Emily Roth, my therapist, said it was normal. "Your brain is learning you're safe again," she told me. "It takes time." She gave me exercises to ground myself when memories started to intrude. I used them often. It was around then that Mom mentioned Lacey had found a small apartment and was working part-time at a local bakery. "She hasn't asked us for money," Mom said. "Not once." I nodded. That, more than anything she could have said, told me she was trying to stand on her own. Even with all the changes, I kept the restraining order paperwork in the top drawer of my nightstand. I hoped I'd never have to use it, but I liked knowing it was there. By the spring of the 2nd year after the assault, my days had settled into something steady. I was working full-time again, this time in community health instead of the ER. The pace was slower, the focus more on prevention and patient education, and I found I could breathe easier at the end of the day. On weekends, I volunteered with Survivors Rising, helping assemble care packages and occasionally speaking at small events. Standing in front of strangers no longer made my throat tighten. The story was still mine, but it no longer felt like it owned me. Lacey was keeping her distance unless we saw each other at our parents' house. When we did, the conversations were simple and careful, but they no longer had the edge they used to. One Sunday, as Mom cleared plates and Dad started coffee, Lacey leaned back in her chair. "I got into the community college program I applied for," she said. She smiled, an actual unguarded smile, and for a moment she looked like the sister I grew up with. I told her I was glad. She didn't rush to fill the silence after, and that felt like progress. That summer, Brenda asked if I'd be willing to lead one of the weekly groups while she attended a conference. I said yes before I had time to second-guess it. The night of the meeting, I arranged the chairs in a circle and set out water bottles on the table. As people filed in, I recognized the same look I'd had my first night, unsure, exhausted, but needing to be there. We talked about boundaries, about the hard work of keeping them in place when others push against them. When the meeting ended, a woman lingered behind to say, "Hearing you talk about what happened." It made me feel less alone. I drove home with that sentence echoing in my mind. In early fall, Mom called to say Lacey had signed her divorce papers. She didn't make a big announcement, Mom told me, just said it was done. A week later, Lacey came by my apartment. She stood in the doorway holding a small box. Inside was a mug I'd given her years ago, back when Thursday night dinners were our routine. "I kept it," she said quietly. "Thought maybe you should have it." I set it on the counter, not sure what to say. She didn't stay long, but as she left, she said, "I'm trying, Charlotte." The seasons turned, and with them the sharp edges of the past began to dull. I still had the restraining order paperwork tucked in my nightstand, but months had passed without a single violation. I stopped looking over my shoulder when I walked to my car after work. I no longer avoided the street where my old apartment had been. The memories were still there, but they felt lighter, as if carrying them had made my hands stronger. One cold December afternoon, after finishing a home visit for a patient, I drove past the brick building where Survivors Rising held its meetings. The windows glowed against the gray sky. I thought about the first night I'd stepped inside, how heavy the air had felt in my lungs, and how far the road since then had been. It struck me then that I'd started that night looking for safety, but somewhere along the way I'd found something else, something that felt like solid ground. A few days before Christmas, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off some gifts. The tree was lit, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon, and for once there was no rush or tension in the air. Lacey was already there helping Mom wrap a set of mugs. She looked up when I walked in and gave me a small smile. It wasn't the kind that carried 1,000 unspoken apologies. It was simpler, steadier, like we had reached a place where words didn't have to be forced. We spent the afternoon together sipping coffee and sorting through old family photos. At one point, Lacey slid a picture across the table. It was from years ago, the two of us sitting on the porch steps leaning into each other with matching summer tans. "I've been thinking about this day," she said softly. "I want us to get back to that." I didn't make promises, but I nodded. Some things didn't need to be rushed. When it was time to leave, I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter behind me. The ache I used to carry in my chest felt lighter now. Life hadn't turned out the way I once pictured it, but it was mine again piece by piece. I had learned how to protect it without shutting people out completely. On Christmas morning, I woke early and sat by my own small tree, the lights casting a warm glow in the quiet room. Outside, the street was still and covered in frost. I thought about the people I'd met through Survivors Rising, the stories I'd heard the nights I'd doubted my own strength. And I realized something healing wasn't a finish line. It was a path you kept walking even when the ground was uneven, even when the air was cold. If you've ever felt like the weight you carry is too heavy, I hope you remember this. You can set it down for a while. You can take a breath, let others help you, and trust that the pieces can be rebuilt. Maybe not the same as before, but strong enough to hold. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've walked your own long road back, I'd be honored if you'd share your story too.